Hey, right. For those of you that were here on the last live, you know I've got my fancy graphics now. You know I could pull a rabbit out of the hat at any second. So let's use that. Let's set the tone a little bit here. Let's set the tone. I'll be back in a second.
Hey Ryan, I want to send this video to you because we're at the end of our coaching, and I want to say there is no way in hell I would be almost 30 pounds down without you. I had tried for almost a decade to shed this unwanted baby weight. I mean, not because I'm a baby, but the weight that I gained from having babies. I tried for almost a decade to shed that on a plant-based diet and couldn't figure out how to do it until I met you. Not only were you there for me anytime I needed you, except when you were sleeping, you held my hand through this entire process. And I think the biggest value for me was you helped me break through all of those mental and emotional ties I had to food, which I am happy to say no longer exist. Without you, I would still be going round and round in circles trying to figure out how in the world to get where I am right now. I would pay for your service over and over again. Don't care how much it cost. I would pay for it over and over again. You have been amazing, and I think anyone who needs to lose weight and eats a plant-based diet should be signing up with you. Hands down.
Well, I think I cut that short early. If that isn't a shameless self-promotion, I don't know what is, but there's a reason why I've played that. It's not just to be braggadocious here and, beat my own horn about my coaching abilities. It's because we're going to hear more about Tia. If you don't know Tia from Healthy Vegan Mum, we're going to hear more about her amazing story shortly and what we can take from her successes with weight loss, what you can start implementing for yourself. And that's the theme here today in this live stream. I'd like to walk you through some of the top habits and attributes, attitudes as well, of my most successful clients over the years. So you can take lessons from their journey, from their story, from their ups and their downs, and apply them to your own weight loss efforts. That's what it's all about, right? You have to glean little nuggets here and there. Sometimes you listen to a whole podcast, there's just one line from someone you look up to that gets you, that sits with you in a certain way. And that line, not to sound overly dramatic, it can change your perspective on something totally. It can frankly change your life, not to sound, as I say, overly dramatic. So hopefully you can just glean something from, Tia and several other folks' success stories that I'm going to share with you here today. Of course, before we dive in though, if you want to learn more about working one-on-one with me directly to lose your first 20 pounds and create sustainable habits for life, head over to ryanadamscoaching.com. I'll put the link below, but once more, that's ryanadamscoaching.com to learn more about my Slim and Sustain coaching program. So back to Tia. We all know lovely Tia, don't we, from Healthy Vegan Mum? Or if you don't, go and subscribe to her stuff. Wonderful resource for plant-based eating and weight loss. Now, Tia lost 24 pounds with me. She's lost a bunch of weight since then, so I can't take too much credit as her coach in those initial days. That was years and years ago. But she lost 24 pounds with me. But now, and this is what I love to hear, she's down 45 pounds in total, which is brilliant. Applying those Slim and Sustain principles even after the program is finished to get to a lovely slim physique and body weight that she's now really, really happy with. Now, Tia, there's a lot to credit her for. You've likely heard me speak very highly of her previously. A lot of wonderful, successful traits that Tia embodies, absolutely. Brilliant in so many ways. But I want to share 4 things in particular that I feel she got right and could be of some help to you. Let's see. I've got a nice before and after photo. I meant to post this. I'm not so good with my graphics after all. After that great start, I'm not so good. So I appreciate you're going to lose me here for a second. You can see my big head there in the corner. But that's Tia's initial weight loss on the Slim and Sustain program anyway. Amazing. Amazing. Well done to you, Tia. So number 1, first thing I think Tia got right. She ate similarly most days. Now, to some people, this could be slightly stale and repetitive, but I think this is just brilliant. If you as an individual can be happy with simplicity with your food, it makes my job as a coach so much easier because I know I don't have to come up with new options and recipes and being elaborate with anything to keep the client in question sort of engaged and excited by what they're eating. Simplicity, number 1, I suppose, from a coaching perspective, is very easy. It's very easy when a client likes simple dishes, obviously. Now, it is also my job to create more, options in time, absolutely. But it does make it easier when a client is happy with simple things. But beyond that, simplicity for them. So forget me, simplicity for Tia, to just know that each meal has no more than 4 or 5 ingredients. And then over the course of a week, there's a rotation in her case initially with me of about 5 or 6 different meals. In the entirety of a week, she was only using about 5 or 6 different meals, sometimes even less than that. And to just know that that's all she needed to take care of on her grocery list, and then what she needed to stock in her fridge and her pantry. It makes it so much easier, doesn't it? Especially with Tia, as she was managing a household with 2 young children. So simplicity is really easy to adhere to. The risk with simplicity is that things become boring and stale, but you just need to introduce things as you go in time, when your instinct is that things might be getting boring or stale. But the other benefit of simplicity, I would say, is this idea of, I can't find the best words for this, but sort of testing, because you get to test repetition. If someone's always having different meals, even if they're programmed relatively well to their goals, there's some slight sort of uncertainty about what may or may not be working, depending on what the result of the scale shows at the end of the week, right? Whereas if someone is having the same couple of meals day in, day out, you can very conclusively say, okay, this combination of foods in totality, they're not working for weight loss, right? But when someone's using 10 different meals over the course of a week, as opposed to in Tia's case, 5 or 6 initially, well, there's so many things you could point at as a potential contributor to that slowness or to that plateau. Does that make sense? So I think from a testing perspective, especially early on in a weight loss phase, simplicity is really, really valuable in that regard. You get good and reliable feedback versus if you're doing all these different kinds of meals. Does that make sense? But I would say, to sum up on the simplicity point and being fairly repetitive, eating fairly similarly, you just don't overcomplicate things. Some people, they set the bar so high, they get out all those elaborate, recipes from the vegan cookbooks and whatnot. And it's just so much easier when it's like, okay, just do this, and it's relatively simple. And as I say, you don't need to be, do mono meals or anything like that. You can be more complex than that, of course. And that's what I recommend. But, there's no reason really, beyond like a nutrient diversity perspective, that's important as well. But beyond that, there's no reason to have more than 5 or 6 ingredients in every single dish you do. There really isn't. You can get everything you need from there, as long as there's enough different stuff happening in each of the meals you have over the course of the day. Does that make sense? So you're covered in terms of selenium, magnesium, potassium, etc., and your macronutrient breakdown as well. Second habit, or second thing, action, let's say, that Tia got right, is she accepted the position she was in. This is something I've been talking about increasingly recently, because I didn't really realize the importance of it before until something in my personal life, where I had to be very honest with myself about where I was at, so I could then accept the protocols required to travel the new path forward and go to the next level, rather than being filled with my own ego or stories about where I thought I was or how I should be doing, quote unquote, but just accepted the reality of where I was at. And Tia came to me as somebody that had already read all those books, The Starch Solution, so on and so forth, some of Gregor's work, I think, if I remember correctly. But generally speaking, she knew the fundamentals, and that's even downplaying it slightly. She knew a lot, to be fair, about plant-based nutrition. She'd read all the books. But in terms of her progress, she was actually a beginner. And it takes some humility to realize that. It takes some humility to go, okay, I need to learn the fundamentals again with somebody, as opposed to just digesting them from a book. And then I need to not think that I'm anywhere further ahead than applying those fundamentals and being okay and accepting and happy with just applying those fundamentals before we got to any advanced stuff. So not punching above your weight, I suppose, is a very good metaphor for it. Tia understood exactly where she was at. She had the humility to do that. And then she could open herself up to suitable strategy that met her needs. And she could come through the door like she did. And I always reference this. I've talked about this before. She came into that first coaching call with me, and still to this day, she was one of the most transparent people I've ever worked with in that initial coaching call. Now, I have wonderfully transparent clients. I think that I have a great relationship with the vast majority of my clients. I have a great relationship with all of my clients when things are going well, naturally. But with Tia especially, And so what I was going to say there, when you have a great relationship with a client, you expect them to be transparent. You expect them to be okay with being vulnerable and to be able to leave their ego at the door and open up to you. That's what you want, and that's the sort of environment and relationship you try to cultivate as a good coach. And that's what happens with most of my clients, like I say. And we do, create a really open relationship like that. But with Tia, she was doing that in call number 1, right? It wasn't as though I had to build trust for weeks and weeks to foster that in Tia. She was like, no, these are my problems. This is where I'm at. Like I said, she accepted where she was at. She was open with it. She wore her heart on the sleeve. And she turned up to that first coaching call with me in the perfect frame of mind to actually accept new instruction and to change. And I think, even though that isn't like a really cool tidbit or like a hack for weight loss, eat potatoes and you'll lose weight, I think it's a very conceptual idea what I'm talking about right now. But I think it's one of the most fundamental sort of attributes that I'm going to share in the entire live stream. So I really don't think that can be understated. Number 3, third thing Tia got right. Even though her meals were fairly simple, as I alluded to in point number 1, she knew how to prioritize/balance them with the rest of her life, with 2 young kids, with cooking for her husband as well. She is amazingly organized. And if you've seen her amazing YouTube videos before or her stuff on Instagram, of course, just have a look for Healthy Vegan Mama on those platforms. You'll see how organized she is with her cooking. And the example I always give for this to other clients, actually, I don't think Tia knows I do this, but I always reference her pantry. And I know she's moving house at the moment, so maybe this isn't quite so relevant at this time. But Tia's got this amazing pantry that she puts in lots of her kitchen, she puts in lots of her videos and whatnot on her Instagram, and it's just stocked to the brim. So much that if the bran flakes are going low, they're right on the grocery list. It's so organized, it's so clear. Tia was really, really organized. And some people have that, don't they, in spades in their personality traits. Some people find it easier to be organized, or let's say more natural to be organized than others. But even if you're unorganized, if you believe yourself, and whether this is true or not, but whether you believe yourself to be an unorganized person, someone that isn't, naturally sort of likely to organize things, smoothly in their life, you're going to have to learn it. You're going to have to learn it with the food especially, because it's not enough to be reliant on takeout. You don't want to be eating out multiple times a week. You don't want to be just having what another family member is having just because they happen to be cooking if it's not that good for you. If it's great for you, if they're doing something similar to you, that's fine. Enjoy and allow someone else to cook for you. That's wonderful. But you don't just want to say yes in those times where you're unprepared, unorganized, and so on. I'm not talking about batch cooking or meal prep or having loads of Tupperware containers. Tia never needed or had to do, or chose to do that with me. I didn't ask her to do that. She didn't need to do that. There was some stuff like her sauces and whatnot that we were batch cooking back then. And, maybe if she made some rice, she'd make a bunch, or she used to do the frozen rice, actually, so that's not the best example. But, she wasn't, on Sunday, she wasn't spending 3 hours prepping everything for the entire week. Now, some people, I appreciate they do have to do that for their schedule. I've got a couple of clients right now. They do have to be a bit more meticulous, and it is more integral that they're more meticulous with their meal prep for their own adherence and consistency. It is seemingly more key to their success because of their schedule. But Tia didn't actually have to do too much of that, but she saw the value, and she has a natural proclivity for being very organized anyway. And it really, really helps us from a food perspective. I haven't even talked about the exercise, but you can see how that factors into having a clear schedule, having blocks of time, sort of segmented off for exercise, for personal, for family commitment, work-related stuff, so on and so forth, right? This applies to exercise too, but primarily I'm talking about this through a nutrition lens. Even though her meals were very, very simple, she knew how to prioritize and balance them with the rest of the commitments and responsibilities she had in her personal life and in the household. And finally, the fourth thing that I think Tia did absolutely brilliantly was not fearing carbs. She put her trust in the process. She put her trust in this high carb, methodology that I have my clients follow. Now, this seems like a given, doesn't it? Because I've been talking about this so long here. Many in the plant-based world that have been sort of fishing around the plant-based world, many get this. So you would think maybe this isn't an argument that I have to put forward all the time, but it's very often that I have to sort of almost convince clients at the start to really put their trust in carbohydrates and have to make my case as to why carbohydrates are used in the quantity and the type that they're used in this plan. I have to make that case to them to get them them on board and to sort of pitch them. Now, of course, when we're a couple of weeks in and they can actually see the results they're getting and how great they feel, and they understand a little bit more about nutrition as I teach them as we go, or they do their own research, then it's all good. Okay, that goes away. That fear of carbohydrate quickly dies. But initially, sometimes I need to do this almost sales pitch on the role of carbohydrates, what they actually do, some of the misconceptions around them, to really get clients on board. None of that with Tia. She was like, yes, let's do this high carb thing. I've been flirting with this anyway, but let's go all in. I trust that. I trust you, Ryan. Let's go. Let's do this. So that fear around carbohydrates can really hold people back. It didn't Tia, but it can really hold people back, because if you go into every meal you eat with reservations about whether it's going to work for weight loss, you can have great willpower and commitment, but are you going to stick to that day in, day out? Or are you just going to have one bad win and you're automatically going to attribute that to some of the carbohydrates you're eating? It's tricky, but Tia, none of that was possible because she put her faith in that. She understood their role. She trusted me as well to boot. And then in time, you know, we could create a new narrative. Not that Tia needed too much of it because she already understood lots of this stuff, but we could create a new narrative about the foods that actually do work very well for weight loss. And that's the path that many of my clients go on when it comes to carbohydrates. A little bit of trepidation, maybe carb phobia is too strong a term. Some clients have that, but let's say a bit of apprehensiveness about using carbohydrates to the degree to which we use them. Couple of weeks in, bang, gone with results. Tia, she already acted like she got the results and just trusted in that. And I really respect and appreciate that from her, because the carb phobia thing, like I say, maybe for some of you, phobia is too strong a word, but it really does hold people back. And the satiation element, like I was such an anti-carber, you know, more like 7, 8 years ago. I was such an anti-carber. Like if I was trying to diet or cut down during my university years, as I've spoken about fairly extensively, the first thing to go for me was carbohydrate. And that is just the opposite of how I think now. They're the last thing for me to go if I had to cut something out now. Not that I would ever entirely cut out a macronutrient, because that's nonsense as well. So that's Tia. So some lessons there from her story. Let me have a sip of water, folks, before we get on to Neve and her wonderful lessons next. So let's see. I'm playing with my graphics again. Neve. But let me also put this up, guys. If you're not following me, because some of the before and after photos I'm showing and talking about my clients, I tend to talk about my clients and their successes a lot more, and lessons to learn from their story, a lot more on my Instagram than I do my YouTube. I'm going to change that, and I'm changing that with this live stream, I suppose. But if you want to hear more from not just my advice, but hear more from my clients and see more from them, so you can actually know that I really do this, and I'm not just a talking head on the internet. This is actually my livelihood, and this is my profession now. Head over to @RyanAdamsUK. That's my Instagram page. Once more, that's @RyanAdamsUK. Of course, my fancy, not so fancy really, but my fancy graphic on the screen there, just to remind you. Okay, onwards then. Now I've got that bit of admin out of the way. Let's have a look at Neve's before and after photos here. I appreciate you're going to lose me, but here I am. So yeah, Neve had a brilliant transformation. Now, I've got to say here, she didn't lose all of this weight with me. That's 50 pounds, isn't it? She didn't lose all of that with me, but I can tell you what she did lose with me. It's in my notes here. So Neve lost 28 pounds on the Slim and Sustain program with me in those 90 days, but she's now down, at the last time of us speaking anyway, 50 pounds by, again, continuing like Tia did to apply Slim and Sustain principles. Let's take her off the screen. You've had a good look now. Amazing transformation from Neve. And like I say, at last we spoke, she's still going strong. It's a good reminder, actually. I'm going to follow up with her after this and pop her a message. Neve, if you're watching, drop me a message or I'm coming for you. One way or the other, we're going to be speaking shortly. So here's what worked very well for Neve. Here's what she got right. So number one, well, big problem, first of all, was reliance on takeout and frozen ready meals. She was doing this a lot, like those pasta dishes, because I should, again, full disclosure, Neve won't mind me saying this, prior to working with me, she was vegetarian, but not vegan, but obviously highly interested in going vegan, and again had been flirting with it. So she was having like lots of pasta dishes with loads of cheese and whatnot on, and so very reliant on those sorts of frozen microwavable meals, but also takeout as well, particularly stir fry, particularly Chinese food, if I remember correctly, Neve. So what happened initially is I came in, we created a meal plan for her, as I do with all my clients, and she just from day one, she thrived on that structure. It was a huge part of what she'd been missing. Don't get me wrong, there were many variables in Neve's success, but that structure, I think, was probably the biggest deal breaker for her. I sense that was probably, again, she'd have to confirm, but my perception of it is that was probably the biggest thing for her that broke her through, actually having a plan. again, this extends to exercise, but I'm talking primarily about food here. It made a huge difference knowing what and how much to eat. That was really, really key for Neve, I think. And therefore, she didn't have to rely on those quick sort of convenience grabs. She's very dedicated to her job, Neve, as certainly was at the time of us working together. And sometimes she'd, work late. And so she didn't have to grab that stuff. She didn't have to order that stuff because she had a plan. Now, of course, a plan doesn't, omit you from any temptation or cravings or that sort of thing, does it altogether? Of course not. Neve could have had my plan and she still could have called up Domino's Pizza, or maybe more realistically in Neve's case, the nearest Chinese takeaway. She still could have done that. But having a plan gave her something to be accountable to, and it gave her clear instructions. And again, like I spoke about with Tia, Neve's plan was simple, and she was delighted with that. She was happier that it was more simplistic than it was complex, and it works. So she loved that structure. She went from having very little structure around food. She knew what the right foods to eat for weight loss were, but there's a difference between knowing that in your mind, waking up in the morning and thinking, right, I've got to eat something healthy today. I've got to eat healthy stuff today. I want to make good choices. There's a very big difference between that. I talked about this in my live stream too, and waking up in the morning and saying, oh, what's for breakfast? It's here on my plan. Now, you don't even need a coach for this. I know it might sound like a bit of a sales pitch for what I do, and I suppose to a degree it is. I'm talking about my clients, right? And, I always want to work with more people. But you don't need a coach for this. You can write your own plan. Okay, you don't entirely know whether that will work for weight loss. And yeah, you don't have my knowledge on that. But you can be organized. I spoke about that, 10 minutes ago, didn't I? You can create your own plan. Okay, here are the breakfast options I'm going to have for the next couple of days. Here are the dinner options. Here's the lunches. Here's what I'm going to do for snacks. You can write that all out on paper, or even, take notes and save it, on the notes app of your phone or your computer, whatever it is, your PC. You can get something clear on paper so you've got structure. And what does structure do? It gives you clear boundaries and confines to act within. And not enough people are willing to do that for themselves. They want to keep hold of those old habits. So very rarely can they actually commit to a decent structure. That's what Neve did. And I was about to say that's what I did for Neve, but that's not true. That's what Neve permitted me to do for her. She allowed me to come in and say, okay, let's tear all this stuff down that you're doing. Here's your plan. Stick to this. Trust in this. It will work. And even if there's a small outside chance that it doesn't work, we'll troubleshoot. We'll fix it. Trial and error, and we will make it work. Let's go. Let's do this. And Neve was fine with that. In fact, she was really happy with that, with actually being told what to do and not having to work it out all for herself, not having to work out the macronutrient breakdown and the calories and the protein. Again, that might be something that if you're doing this yourself, it might be hard to know exactly what your numbers should be. Fair enough. I appreciate the struggle with that. But still, get something down on paper so you've got a clear template for how you want to act. As I say, structure creates the boundaries and the confines for you to act within. So many people are missing that structure. Everyone, like I always say, everyone wants to lose weight. Very few people actually have a plan to do so. Second thing Neve did very well, she actually enjoyed and was satisfied by her meals. Now, I know this sounds like a really obvious one, but you'll be amazed that the people that watch, there are people out there, lots of them, that watch, some of you listening, and I don't mean this condescendingly, you watch a What I Eat in a Day video, and your favorite YouTuber says, oh, this is a pretty good meal for health and weight loss. And so you just sort of copy and paste it and do that for yourself. And even if you don't like it necessarily, because you think it's good for weight loss, well, I'll stick with that. Now, I think there's a question of sustainability there. Generally speaking, I don't think the point I'm making is the best argument, because people won't stick to a food that they don't like for very long. But even hypothetically, let's say this is true. People tend to sort of copy and paste from cookbooks or from, as I say, What I Eat in a Day vlogs, and they take that and they implement that in their own diet. Now, I love these resources and even my cookbooks and whatnot. I want people to feel inspired and to have meal ideas, but you must adjust it for you. Don't force yourself to eat sweet potatoes because you hear sweet potatoes are great. Don't force sweet potatoes down your gullet every single day if you're not really a fan of the taste of sweet potatoes, or it's kind of hard for you to cook sweet potatoes. Maybe it's a time issue. Maybe you don't like doing them the fast way in the microwave because of how the texture, so on and so forth. And to be fair, those are valid arguments with potatoes. They can be, especially sweet potatoes, they can be a bit of hard work compared to just, some whole grains and beans, right? And so, I think that's a relatively decent argument. Don't force stuff. With Neve, of course, we had to introduce new options as we went, but not many, to be fair with her. But we had we quickly happened upon, because she was so clear in the food she did like. We quickly, were oh my goodness, this shouldn't be that difficult. We quickly were able to sort of pinpoint the types of meals that Neve would like, and of course, I built those, as I say, into her done for you plan. And so she could just enjoy that stuff. And if she didn't like anything, we'd switch it up, we'd change it, and I'd give her so many options that if she got bored of another meal, she always had another option, and we could always talk about adding, more variety in time. I think this is really big. She actually enjoyed what she was doing, and it was suitable for her lifestyle in terms of, number one, taste, because you have to enjoy it. Number two, scheduling and preparation time. Three, I suppose budget is one. I don't think we ever had a conversation about that with Neve. Not to reveal your financial situation, Neve. We never spoke, I don't think, about budget, but that's definitely one. You don't want to be spending loads of money on XYZ ingredients if there's a certain budget that you're, operating within. And so you have to make this stuff stick for you. And that's very hard to do when you're in this sort of copy and paste recipe mentality. So think about the key word I'm going to use here that I always go on about, a bit of a buzzword for me nowadays, adherence. Think, right, can I actually adhere to this plan that I'm proposing to myself? So like I said for the previous point, yes, you need a plan of action. Yes, you need structure. Get that. Second aspect to that, I suppose, is the caveat to that is make sure that's an appropriate plan for you, for what you're able to do and for your needs. Does that make sense? Neve liked this. She was satisfied by this, and it made the whole process of losing weight so much easier. It helped no end with cravings because she was eating foods she actually enjoyed. And she wasn't feeling like she was missing out. So she could just sort of focus on that. Whereas if you really feel deprived, not eating, foods that you enjoy, healthy foods you enjoy, and then someone asks you to come out for pizza, you're so much more likely to do that. So much more likely to do that. And Neve didn't have so much of that feeling like she was missing out. In fact, I remember conversations with Neve where I even said to her, I know this sounds maybe counterproductive from a coach's perspective, or counterintuitive rather. I even said to her, look, you're going to have to eat out at some point. I actually want you to eat out so you can test yourself and you can have something and know that, it's not going to derail you altogether, and trust your judgment in a restaurant, because it's inevitable future. And this, bear in mind, this was all in lockdown era here in the UK. So that's another important bit of context. But I even was more encouraging me to eat out than she was, because she was that happy with what she was doing and the results it was producing. So build a plan around the meals you like. Think about adherence. And finally, number three here, big one as well. Neve didn't restrict those healthy sugars. She had berries in her oatmeal most mornings, and often her snack option was fruit-based things, fruity snacks, quite fruity snacks. And fruit is just amazing for weight loss, one of the best food groups for weight loss alongside vegetables, and brilliant for craving prevention. And please note, I've covered this load, so I'm not going to go in depth on this. Please note, there's a huge distinction between the natural sugars you can find in fruit and having lots of added refined sugars in your diet that are mixed in with lots of other nasties, incredible amounts of fat, oil, additives and whatnot in junk foods. They are a far cry away from eating some strawberries, for instance. So yeah, polar opposites. And yeah, Neve didn't restrict those healthy sugars. Again, trusted in the fruit thing like Tia did, generally with the carbohydrate category. And it took care again of a lot of those cravings and just it's amazing for weight loss. Fruit is brilliant for weight loss as well. So that's Neve's story. One more time then, there's her before and after photo. Brilliant, Neve. Virtual round of applause to you. That's absolutely incredible what you've done and what you're continuing to do. I hope. I haven't spoken to you for a couple of weeks, but I hope. And last but certainly not least here is Jeff. Where do we start with Jeff? Jeff is awesome. Jeff was exceptional. Honestly, I know I'm speaking, dramatically and in lots of superlatives like I often do, but Jeff was exceptional to work with. There's a lot to say about him. Bit of context, when Jeff came to me, his biggest barriers were as follows. Three big things that stand out. Number one, convenience eating, and that was largely to do with his work, frankly, but that's no excuse, as he admitted to. Grabbing sort of fast and often junk food options on the go between jobs. Jeff was in contractor work, so he was often bouncing between locations. Sometimes he'd stay at one location for an extended period of time, but when you've got an on-the-go sort of profession, it can be quite hard with food, admittedly. I'll talk about how we counteracted it shortly, but it can. It's a legitimate barrier to eating well, absolutely. Second big barrier for Jeff, same as Neve, actually, he had no plan of action. So again, no framework for which his food choices should be centered around, or to give him some kind of level of instruction. Nothing. Again, knew, okay, I should probably be eating more of X, Y, and Z ingredients. Okay, that might be a good meal for me. But nothing written down, nothing clear, no clear boundaries and structure again. And number 3, social pressures. I think this was least of the 3 in terms of being disruptive to Jeff's attempts to lose weight, but still worth mentioning, of course, making poor choices too frequently when eating out. And I say too frequently because occasionally you can make a less than ideal choice and it won't completely derail your results, but it was happening slightly too frequently for Jeff. And sometimes struggling, Jeff was to, I suppose, what's the best language for this? Stay immune to unsupportive comments and whatnot, and caving when people might ask Jeff, oh, why don't you have this with me? Or why are you doing that? And I mean, I'm actually like smirking slightly and almost on the verge of giggling as I talk about this, because how much Jeff has changed on this third point in particular is just awesome. He's so resilient and so strong with what he's doing now, to the extent that even his co-workers are just like, wow, Jeff, this is amazing what you're doing. Like, what are you doing? Teach us. I think there's even on this screenshot here that I just put up, what does he say about his co-workers here? Yeah, the amount of comments I get from co-workers is amazing. And especially from men, yeah, because men don't compliment each other. Guys out there, we don't tend to compliment each other so often, we know. And so, yeah, that really does say something about how much Jeff has changed in terms of that resilience. And now almost being, maybe sounds grandiose, he would sort of play this down if he was listening, but Jeff, almost a role model for people now with this stuff, which probably feels weird to you because, you're still on your journey. But seriously, that's where you're at now. And that's just amazing, given that social pressures were one of your biggest barriers, a year ago, half a year ago, whatever. Amazing. So what did he or we as a team get right with Jeff? Well, before we talk strategy, and we will, I think we've got to talk about attitude. I mean, that applies also to Neve and Tia in the previous sections. But Jeff did so many of the things that I asked my clients to do from sort of an attitude and a mentality perspective, running towards me and not away from me when they're stuck, not avoiding me, which again, I know it sounds like a really obvious thing that clients should come to me if they're struggling, but you'd be amazed, folks. You'd be utterly amazed, because we have egos, and I'm not the best with this. We might feel embarrassed about opening up about something we're struggling with. None of that with Jeff. Came straight to me when he was struggling with something. Whether it was progress slowing down, whether it was a meal he didn't like, whether it was sort of maybe a bit of a mindset issue he was having, came straight to me. No hesitation, no ego involved whatsoever. Like I say, left his ego at the door and allowed me to actually coach him. I know this sounds obvious stuff, but these are actually traits that aren't exhibited by lots and lots of people. Number 2, they don't worry. Here's another thing that my top clients do. They don't worry that I might find their question stupid. A lot of people do that. They're embarrassed to ask questions that they believe are silly, to which I always say, look, I've probably heard your question 100 times before. I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I've probably heard your question. There's nothing that I find silly. You ask me what you think is appropriate, and don't be so in your head that you're trying to sort of filter out what you want to ask me because of how I'll judge you for it. Because you're never going to get the max out of me if you've always got that sort of trepidation about, well, what can I say to Ryan, or what can I ask? They finish their workouts. Another big one. They finish their workouts even when they're tired or even when they're unmotivated. This can apply to food too. Even if Jeff had a long day, didn't matter, still sticking to the plan. They comply with all the accountability systems. Jeff was always in touch with me, always turned up to our calls on time, wasn't messing me around, kept that weight tracker up to date, or rather, actually, that's ironic because we did have some problems digitally, didn't we, Jeff, with the weight tracker if you're watching this, but always kept me up to date on his weight. Always made notes of things to ask me about later if it wasn't a convenient time for him. He complied with all the accountability rules that I set him so we could stay in touch. They take massive action. My top clients, they take massive action, even if they're unsure or doubtful. Jeff did that. They don't try to outthink the program or make changes on their own. I didn't say these exact words, but with Tia, she already had a decent amount of knowledge, but she didn't try and outthink it. She was like, okay, Ryan, let's do that. I'd say, okay, Tia, here's what we're going to change. Okay, Ryan. And Tia was very independent, very self-sufficient. So sometimes she'd be on the verge of proposing a change herself, but she always stuck with me and she always trusted my judgment. And it's not as though I didn't want to hear my clients' suggestions, But Tia, she let me take the lead and tell her what to do and take instruction. And that's really important. Jeff was brilliant with that. And another thing, they realized they've made an investment in this program, in the program they're working with me, and a belief in me. They haven't invested in another program at the same time. They're believing in me. So trust me, and let me, obviously in time, I have to earn your respect and I have to earn your trust even more with results. And by you realizing that I'm not just a random person from the internet and I am really caring about what happens with my clients. But having that initial trust, okay, I've made an investment in this guy. Let's do this. Let's believe in this process. Jeff was great with all those things, as my top clients are. Now, in terms of what we got right more from a strategy perspective, because that's more mindset stuff. In terms of what we got right from a strategy perspective, simple and easy meal plan. I mentioned this with both the other folks. Simple and easy meal plan. No fancy stuff, no frills, nothing too elaborate for Jeff's schedule. And I talked about this with Neve. Adherence. Note, for Jeff's schedule. I didn't just say nothing too elaborate. I said nothing too elaborate for Jeff's schedule, because what might have been elaborate for Jeff might not have been elaborate for someone else, and vice versa. So it's about seeing what Jeff's lifestyle is like. We got on the phone, I worked out what his lifestyle was like. He told me more about that, more about his working schedule and his personal life. And we could actually create options that were suitable for that. Does that make sense? So again, think about adherence. Think about how your week goes. Do you need a slightly different meal plan on weekends? This is a good example. To weekdays, maybe you do. Okay, you don't want to make a plan that's really complex and you're having different meals every day. But, maybe you do have to sort of separate a little bit meals on weekends and weekdays because of your commitments, because of your schedule on those days. Makes sense? So that's what we got right for Jeff. Nothing too elaborate for his schedule. Number two, second thing we got right, backup plans and grab and go options. And I think, I already alluded to, so this is an obvious one when I talked about Jeff's job earlier on, being a contractor and driving around different locations. That's obvious. You need backup plans and options for those times. So having the right snacks was a big thing. But I think the biggest game changer, and I think Jeff would say this, and we had, I'm sure, testing my memory, we had conversations on this. The sandwiches that Jeff had, they were a game changer. Like hummus and veggie sandwiches with decent quality, Ezekiel or Dave's Killer Bread. Shout out to those great bread options in the US. Amazing. We don't have quite so many good options here, sadly. And so I think that was great. And just the fact, probably when I can't remember exactly, but I imagine when I first proposed sandwiches to Jeff, he was like, what? I can have sandwiches? And to my response to that is, yeah, like you can have sandwiches and lose weight and have a really healthy lifestyle. It just needs to be, the right kind of bread, of course, and it depends what you're putting in them and how much, and how you're eating that sandwich in conjunction with everything else in your diet as to whether it's actually a necessitas or the right meal at that time. And for Jeff, we made sure it was. So it's not really anything to do with the sandwich. It's more what the sandwich symbolized. It's more that the sandwich was something quick and speedy that Jeff could throw together in the morning, put in a Tupperware, wrap in a bit of foil, and take with him on his working day. What a great option. So backup plans, grab and go options. Highly suggest that you guys think of those, especially if you're on trips, traveling, or you have a lifestyle to whereby day to day. It's sometimes hard to predict your exact movements. I've spoken about this loads recently. Right, here's a nugget for you. Here's a real nutrition hack. Lara bars. Lara bars, brilliant. I mean, nutritionally, they're a quality bar, but such a good option in terms of just being able to take with you. Leave a couple of Lara bars in your desk drawer. Leave them in the, the glove compartment of your car. On a warm day, they might not be so good, but have them scattered around. Take one in your bag if you're going to walk around Disneyland, a theme park one day, or you've got an outing. Lara bars, great option. Sandwiches likewise, but obviously you got the question of them being perishable. Lara bars, they last a long time, so they're a great option. So quick hack there. So I don't think Jeff used those actually that much. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. Drop me a message after this. But sandwiches in particular were a game changer for him. Another trait that Jeff displayed was amazing perseverance. We had fairly tough plateaus. I would say no more so than with my average client, actually, but we had some plateaus at various points. It's not all plain sailing, even when you've got a coach. You can't always predict when plateaus are coming, that sort of thing. So we had some tough plateaus to deal with. Bear in mind that Jeff also extended, so he did 6 months with me as opposed to just the initial 90 days. So we had a couple of plateaus, totally normal again. And there was kind of one lengthy period of time where we had some digestion issues, digestion discomfort to deal with as well. And Jeff, he just stuck with me and he allowed me to troubleshoot. And sometimes I was wrong and sometimes I was right. but it was all worth it for the big epiphanies and breakthroughs in the end and the great progress in the end. There's times I look back and I think, oh, I should have done maybe this differently with Jeff and this differently. But I think that about every client. I'm not perfect as a coach. Absolutely not. I don't get everything right. And there is an element of sort of anecdote and trial and error involved with coaching people. Sadly, I do have my templates and my systems, of course, but there is an element of customization and trial and error involved when working with individuals. And Jeff didn't, there were times I'm sure where he was disappointed. Not that he often vocalized it. Jeff was a tough guy, but he never let that disheartenment or any disappointment that he did experience derail him. Whereas some people do. It's not working for me. I'll grab the cake. I'm having tummy troubles. I'll just stop eating fiber altogether or stop eating high fiber foods altogether. No, Jeff trusted in me, stuck with me, and we got through all those problems in the end, and he flew. So that's the stuff we got right. And that's Jeff's story. Let's put him back up on the screen one more time. Absolutely amazing, mate. If you are watching, Jeff, absolutely amazing. Really, really pleased with you. And thanks, Abigail Crown, for your comment. Thank you. I appreciate your support here. That's it on Jeff, and that's it on all the sort of client case studies. We've been going 40 minutes here, but I don't want to finish. I'm not ready. I've got more for you guys. So here's just some sort of more rapid fire, let's say, stuff that I want to share with you in terms of what broad swathes, that's your word of the day, broad swathes of my clients get right. Let's call them other random hints and tips. Number one, this is another attitude one, non-reactivity. Stable mood for both the good and the bad days, the good and bad news. So if you have a perceivably good weigh-in, which doesn't mean it is a good weigh-in, by the way, but let's perceive that you have a good weigh-in, that might feel wonderful and validating, but you never over-celebrate. Why? Because it could be wrong. It's just one weigh-in, right? So even when you have a good weigh-in and you're feeling good about it, and you absolutely should. You should always be a bit cautious because it's just a singular weigh-in, but you don't over-celebrate. Adversely, though, when you have a bad weigh-in, you don't overly berate yourself. You don't take it too far. You don't think, I've got to change something immediately, prematurely, right? Based on one weigh-in. So stable mood, consistent. You've got an attitude and a drive towards a goal, and you don't want to get too excited or too disheartened. Far from that. So you've got to be fairly consistent in your mood to manage the good and the bad times, the good and bad news. When you get in the habit of being reactive, that's when you start getting your head turned, start looking for other solutions. And sometimes you need to do that. And sometimes, of course, you need to make a change. But often people are impatient and they do this prematurely. So I think it's fair to say, as a rule of thumb, most people with weight loss are too impatient, as opposed to being too patient. I do see too much patience sometimes. Sometimes there's people that they haven't lost weight for months and they're still like, no, but I know it will work. And I'm like, no, we've got to try something here. We've got to change something when they start working with me. And so there's definitely such a thing as too much patience. But on the balance of things, I think most dieters, quote unquote, or most weight loss hopefuls, they're too impatient as a rule. And so, I've lost my train of thought slightly on that, but stable mood anyway, promoting non-reactivity, keeping calm when you receive bad news or when you make a mistake. That's the thing as well. When you make a mistake, you have to be critical of it because you have to identify that it was actually a mistake and give yourself some kind of sub-communication that can't happen often. I can't really let that happen all too often. It's not going to happen again if I want success with it. So you have to be able to be critical of it. You don't want to completely forgive yourself instantaneously and just forget about it altogether. But you've got to be merciful at the same time so you don't harbor that and so you don't sit there and let it fester. I'm so bad. I'm such a failure. That sort of negative self-talk. It's not going to help you. So we want consistency in terms of mood and, generally speaking, non-reactivity. I haven't discussed exercise much so far. So here's the next one is going to be on this. Let's say, and I thought about what to include here, and appreciate, but the best thing I could come up with, or the first thing rather that popped into my mind is an appreciation for the role that exercise can actually play with weight loss. Because I think in the plant-based world, weight loss, generally speaking, is exercise, in the equation of weight loss is relatively well underestimated. I tend to say that there are lots of other diet communities out there that actually overemphasize exercise. But in the plant-based vegan community, I feel we underemphasize exercise because of all the emphasis on the food, naturally. And I've even heard other coaches and teachers say, you don't need to worry about exercise whatsoever, just focus on the food. Now, there might be times when that's appropriate if a client's injured. I mean, generally speaking, you can still work around injury and cure injury very, very well without stopping exercise altogether. So that's maybe a bad example. Or when a client's super busy, or when a client's sick, oh, just get your food right now. Miss the gym, stay home, look after yourself, relax. Focus your time and energy on recovering as opposed to, putting your body through more stress, your central nervous system through more stress at the time you're trying to fight a virus or recover from something. So there's times when, telling a client not to do exercise is something that I've done, or have a short break or something like that if they're overworked. But, as a general rule of speaking, the idea that you should only focus on nutrition and not focus on exercise from a weight loss perspective, and then more widely, like a health well-being perspective, to me, it's ludicrous. Exercise is amazing. And I think slightly understated. I think its role is slightly understated. And it does contribute to weight loss. It can make it considerably faster. And exercise, depending on the type, can drastically alter your physique beyond just you losing some fat. So there's that too as well. Body composition, body recomposition, greatly affected by exercise, as opposed to just being in a calorie deficit. So yeah, exercise is important, and I think it gets lost. So a respect and appreciation for exercise, and even if it is harder for you to, sort of overcome exercise obstacles than it is nutrition, still like having such a respect and appreciation and understanding that it can make a difference, so that you actually throw yourself into it and don't just use this sort of the amazing effectiveness of a plant-based diet. Don't just rely on that as being the only way you're going to lose weight. Also combine it with a sensible exercise program for you. Being aware of your weight, I think that's important. Not ignoring the scales altogether. There's some people that, and I'm not saying they're unjustified, that they don't want to weigh themselves. And there are many reasons as to why someone should be cautious with using a scale. I do agree. I haven't got a really binary view on this. But generally speaking, you've got to be aware of your weight. You've got to track it. And yes, there's lots of other measures for success, like the fit of clothes and circumference measurements and your subjective sort of assessment of your physique in a mirror. That's a bit more tricky because you see yourself every day. So there's lighting and other things that can make a difference. And you rely on your own subjectivity. It's not as tangible. So that's hard. Progress photos. So yes, there are other measures of weight loss success, but it's very wise to be aware of your weight. Don't ignore the scales altogether. Have some kind of system for weighing in. My clients, they have their weight tracker. They're told exactly which days to weigh in, and it's certainly not every day. They only have to weigh themselves 3 times a week, but they're told exactly which days they are. And so they just have that structure to stick to, and they have to write it, fill out the weight tracker so I can see their progress. Really helps keep them accountable. Really helps make them not stray too far. It really helps them stay focused and motivated, because they don't, you don't, like I said earlier, you're not going to judge yourself. You shouldn't be judging yourself on one individual weigh-in. But still, at the same time, the client doesn't want to mess up because they don't want to get on the scales and see really high weigh-ins. They don't want to do that. And so it really helps you stay driven and really focused on what you're doing when you're weighing yourself, when you bring some awareness to it. So, if you're not working with me, of course, you can do what you want. You're free to do what you want in terms of how often you weigh yourself and whatnot. All I would say is make sure you've got some frequency, regularity and structure, and make sure you're actually monitoring it. Make sure you're actually writing it down or saving it in an app on your phone. I know there's all sorts of software that can do that automatically for you. Scales, linking traps and all sorts nowadays. I sound like an old man. I'm 28, for goodness sake, in the way I'm talking about that. But apparently those things exist where you can stand on a scale and send it to an app. I didn't even know until a client told me about it recently, or about a year ago. So that was brilliant. So don't ignore the scales altogether, basically. Have some kind of system for weighing in, and then actually look at those weigh-ins so you can see how you're doing and make changes as necessary. And finally, this is probably the biggest one of these sort of random tips at the end here. They always get back on track. Something my top clients do is they always get back on track. And how important is that? Obvious, I know, but they always get back to it. We don't always have a great workout. We don't always eat perfectly. I don't, and I've been doing this for 7 years. That's just, being vegan. Several years prior to that, I had no idea what vegan was several years prior to that, but I was still trying to lose weight. I've been doing this for a very long time now, and I'm still not perfect, and I still have cravings and temptations sometimes. Okay, they're way more infrequent, and I'm way stronger nowadays than I was previously. But I still wobble. I still make mistakes. Sometimes they're, premeditated. Sometimes I've planned them ahead of time. Sometimes they're impulsive mistakes. Not so often, thankfully, nowadays, but those still happen to me. So you shouldn't have some expectation of yourself if you're very new to this. that you're going to be perfect with every single meal for the rest of your life. Of course not. Or that every workout you're going to hit a PR. Not that you should be trying to do that every workout, but every workout's going to feel amazing. You're always going to perform well. In the same way at your job, there's sometimes where you hit things and you're doing well. And in the same way, I imagine in family life, and I can't speak from experience on parenting, but sometimes you're probably performing your function very well as a parent. There's other times where you might think to yourself, well, I was maybe too unreasonable with that, or I wasn't strong enough at going against my kid on that, my child on that. We're not perfect every single day. Give yourself some grace. You've got to be critical of your mistakes, but give yourself some grace and get back on track. Don't let one small mistake be a gateway to lots of other things. That's the sort of proverbial slippery slope that often ensues. And that's it, my friends. Sadly, I don't have time for any Q&A today, but there aren't so many comments. Thank you, Abigail, for all your comments. Sorry, I can't get to them, but no Q&A from me today. I do want to, though, thank you for your time. I hope this was useful. Something a little bit different from me talking about my clients here, but hopefully plenty you've gleaned from their journey. If you want to learn more about working one-on-one with me directly to lose your first 20 pounds and create sustainable habits for life once more, head over to ryanadamscoaching.com. Where's my fancy banner? And so it appears, ryanadamscoaching.com, or click the link down below to learn a little bit more about my coaching program and apply there. Gotta go, folks. Just seen the time. Gotta be somewhere very soon. Speak to you soon. Thanks. I'm just going around in circles. Bye.